Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. And welcome to this quick unscripted video. Well, quick. We'll see. I have a tendency to ramble, as you all well know. Anyways, this unscripted video to take a look at the community survey results from the survey that was put out at the very beginning of the year. I totally fell behind the 8 ball and not only didn't cover this previously, I forgot to fill out the survey. So mea culpa, as I said, this is my mistake. I will try and do better in the future. But I'm curious to look through it now and see what does the community have to say about one-page rules and get an idea of where the game, the community, and the company as a whole might be headed. So let's start with this first one here. Where do you follow OPR news and content? Clearly the top three: Discord, Patreon, website. And those are the three that I go to. When it has there the newsletter, if that includes the email that's sent out by being a part of Patreon, then I would definitely be a part of that too. Me personally, if I hear about it in my inbox, or if I'm interested, I go to the website. I actually don't go to Discord as often as probably I should, but obviously that's their number one go-to for information. So that's not surprising. I did think this was kind of funny here. I don't follow OPR news. Well, then why are you filling out this survey? Anyways, moving on. Which games do you play? No big surprises here. Grimdark Future is their number one because, just like me, I imagine a lot of you who went to OPR, you were leaving 40K. 40K is the biggest IP in Games Workshop, so it makes sense that it's the most popular choice here. What did surprise me, though, is the second most popular is Firefight, the skirmish version of it. I would have assumed that, like in Games Workshop, their number one and number two were the full-size battle games, so Age of Sigmar and Grimdark Future, and then the skirmishes of each would come second, but that is not the case here. Once again, I'm a little confused at this here. I do not play OPR games. So why are you filling this out? I know there's the hobby side. I've met people who have been collecting and painting Warhammer models for decades and they've never played a game. They're not interested in it. So that's probably what this is, but 10%, to me, that's surprising. If it's just the folks who are into the hobby side only, I would have figured that would have been a little bit lower. But anyways, I imagine, and I'll be curious to compare this in 6 months when they do the next community survey, how these numbers will change, especially war fleets and regiments. Because war fleets, as we know, just got its new edition, and the release of Warhammer Old World has rekindled interest in rank and flank. Now, yeah, there have been other rank and flank games like Conquest or Kings of War, but not ones where you can transfer the models over so easily. Conquest, the models are too big. Kings of War, the models are too small. I would expect that in the next survey 6 months from now, the Age of Fantasy Regiments bar gets bigger. Maybe not huge, but it will be a bigger share than it is right now. This next question, how often do you play? This one is a bit surprising. I'm jealous of these folks here in this red slice here, 3+ times a week. Like, wow. I play once a week, maybe 2 on a good week. So I would be probably, where am I here? 1 to 2 times a week. I'm this little blue slice here. The majority here, once or twice a month. Yeah, that makes sense. People try and get a weekly game, and when they can't, they get it the next week. So there you have it there. So all combined, we got people playing fairly regularly. The one thing I would like to see, to put this beside and compare, is demographics. Now, I don't know if when people were filling out this survey, if they put in their age, their gender, their income, or occupation or something like that, but I would be curious to see, is it young college age people who are playing the 3+ times a week, or are they older retired guys who are playing 3+ times a week? So I'd be curious to see how each of these dynamics here aligns with specific demographics, just sheer out of curiosity. I'm not trying to, accuse one side of the community of being lazy and that's why they're playing. I'm just curious who is able to enjoy this hobby that much, because I need to join that group. Okay, where do you play? No surprise here. Overwhelming friends' home. This game system is still in its infancy, and so word of mouth is still the number one way that it's bringing in new players. The other thing, number 2 here is Game Store, but and I'm going to throw this out because I'm curious what you all think. I've heard 2 interesting arguments. I know which one I support, but I'm not going to say. why do more people not play in a gaming store? And one of the arguments is game stores have no incentive to push one-page rules because everything is free, or at least the main rules are free. And if you already are in the gaming stores, because you already have models, so you can play one-page rules without having to buy anything. And so game stores don't have an incentive to push the game that doesn't have sales tied to it. But I've heard the counter to that is it does have sales, it has everything. Whereas if you play a 40K demo and you think this is great, they direct you to the 40K section. You play an OPR demo and say this is great, you can now turn them loose in the store and say build whatever you want. Get that Bolt Action starter set, play Human Defense Force. Get that Hail Caesar set, play Chivalrous Kingdoms. Like, have some fun with it. So is it that game stores have nothing to sell or have everything to sell? But either way, I think part of the reason why this bar is so big is because the game is still being made known. I know every single person I play against and everyone you've seen on the channel, they didn't hear about the game until I told them, and that's why they come to my home now to play games and record them. I have played some at gaming stores. Those ones I can't record. It's just too loud and too noisy and busy. But I expect that over time, maybe not on the next survey 6 months from now, but year, 2 year, 5 years from now, you'll start to see this bar either maintain or drop a little, and the bar here, game stores and clubs, all of these other ones, start to increase as the game becomes more popular. Okay, what minis do you use? I wouldn't say there's anything that really was surprising here. The number one is, of course, people self-printed 3D miniatures, and then after that, using Warhammer stuff. Makes total sense. A lot of people come to one-page rules from Games Workshop, and so they already have the models. That's why it's a big hit. You can jump into the game without having to make any extra purchases. I did find this was interesting. Other 3D printed miniatures. I would have expected the third would have been this one here. Now, I can't read the whole thing, bought on. I imagine that's online. One thing I would like to know is when it says self-printed here, okay, I print my own miniatures. But I have friends who have bought STLs, give them to me to print, and then they reimburse me for the resin. So they're not printing, but do they consider that self-printed? Because they're not buying it online, but they are using one-page rules miniatures. So I wonder if this bar here is slightly misleading, because I don't think 70% of the people who answered this have a 3D printer. They have access to one. They have a friend who has one. But I would like to see on the next one the differentiation a little bit more, more specific. Do you yourself print them? Do you have a friend print them? Or do you go to an official business like Etsy or Only Games and have those guys print them? That I would be more curious to see. Are you interested in buying physical minis? This one surprised me. When I first looked at it, I saw the top, yes from Kickstarter, blue, wow, 65%. And then second glance, oh, no. The yes is this tiny sliver here. That 65% is no, I'm not interested. That was actually surprising. Now, I know most people who are playing, they either have minis from another game or they're into 3D printing or have a friend who has a 3D printer, but I was surprised that only 30% of the people are interested in buying them from somewhere else. In large part because I'm one of those people. Yes, I have a 3D printer, but the more I use it, the more I learn, I don't really enjoy it. Whereas some people look at me and they say, how can you paint for 5 hours? And I look at them and say, how can you not? Like, you get yourself a good book, a good series on streaming something, and you won't see me for the whole weekend. Whereas other folks really enjoy the 3D printing stuff, I don't. I don't like working with the resin. I don't like the stink. I don't have a dedicated room for it. So if I'm 3D printing, either I get to wear my rebreather while I'm trying to do everything else in the kingdom, or I just don't print. So what I usually end up doing is I let a backlog of projects until I have so many, like 10 build plates worth, and I have a pretty big 3D printer. So that way, in 48 hours, maybe 72 hours, I run that printer nonstop and print all of those build plates and then done. Because then I've got to clean it up, get everything back in its containers so that I can start using my kingdom again without having to smell the resin or the alcohol or what have you. Now, I imagine if I had a separate room in my garage or somewhere in the house where I could just, that's the 3D printing room and it's vented. I imagine I would just leave resin in there. And every time I wanted to print something, I'd go and print it, and there we go. So I imagine setup has a lot to do with that. But I'm getting a bit off topic here. I was surprised that this number was not bigger. And I imagine these numbers will get bigger, because as people come into the hobby, we don't just want people transitioning from an old war game to this one. We would love to see new players make this their first foray into tabletop gaming, and they don't want to also have to buy a 3D printer. So I would be curious to compare this question with what it looks like 6 months from now, and see if this slice of the pie here, this big one, shrinks, and which of these slices gets bigger. Those of you who watched my unscripted video about my new dwarf army, I bought that from Etsy. I was more than happy to let somebody else deal with the smell, deal with the cleanup, deal with the finagling. Typically when I 3D print stuff, about 75% of it comes out okay, but that means a quarter of it fails. And I thought, I will pay that premium to get someone else with a better printer who knows what they're doing, using better resin to get me the model. And it will still be way cheaper than buying something from like Games Workshop. So very curious to see how this changes over the next 6 months. All right, moving on. Do you play Dungeons and Dragons? I had to laugh the first time I read this. I'm like, wait, it comes as a surprise? Really? That people who play one nerdy game are going to play another nerdy game? Like, seriously? This surprised you? I don't think I've met very few people who don't play Dungeons and Dragons and some kind of tabletop war game. So, yeah, that seems pretty obvious. That everyone either plays D&D or, if you count the orange and the red, folks who play other ones. So it's the minority here that doesn't dabble in the RPGing and possibly the LARPing. So then, of course, their next question is, if you play D&D, do you want OPR to reach over? And this was interesting, that of the people, well, that's interesting. The question here isn't for those of you who answered yes. So we have 43% who are like, no, I want to keep my hobby separate. That means there are people who play RPGs and don't want to bring one-page rules into it. They want to just do D&D for D&D and OPR for OPR. Whereas everyone else here, half are like, yeah, I'll bring in adventures, and another half here is like, not adventures, but at least stats. So are they going to expand? Why not? We've seen in with the Tixall campaign that's coming out that One Page Rules is now working with Two Thin Coats and working with Chronicle. I could see them reaching out to Wizards of the Coast and saying, hey, how would you like to do something with us? Who knows? All right, which Grimdark Future armies do you play? Now, let me see if I can fit all these on the screen at once. There we go. Number 1 is Alien Hives. That is surprising. And the question I would have here is, when they say armies do you play, does that mean like 1,000 to 2,000 points, or does that include skirmish teams? Because I can't imagine that most players, 40% of them, maybe not most, but 40% have a massive Alien Hive army. It's very popular because the idea of a swarm of bugs, I mean, anyone who's seen Starship Troopers can understand that. But what I'm guessing we're looking at here is people have like 2,000 points of Battle Brothers and then a Grimdark Firefight team of Alien Hives. Heck, I have that. I do not have an Alien Hive army, but depending how this question is interpreted, I could check the box. Yes, I do play Alien Hives because I have a single 5-model team. And the video for it's coming out soon, by the way. Looking at the rest of these, it's what you'd kind of expect. The big armies in 40K are the big armies in Grimdark Future. Tyranids, Space Marines, Dwarves, Guardsmen, Necrons. So yeah, nothing really surprising there. I also just noticed this. Prime Brothers and Battle Brothers are separate. And if we add those, because personally I consider them the same thing, they're just two parts of the same army book. You add those, then they become the most popular by far, which would line up with what you see over in 40K. If we scroll on down to which fantasy armies are the most popular, I don't think I can get them all on the screen. So notice Beastman's doing pretty well, but if we come down here, our top ones, Vampires, then Saurians, then ratmen, then humans. And what I think we're looking at right here is folks who play Total War Warhammer and wanted to play Warhammer Old World, but it didn't exist. And so they came to one-page rules, and they're playing the most popular armies in Total War. Except maybe the dwarves. Where are my boys? Where are they? Havoc dwarves. We got that. Oh, here they are. Yep, and they're doing pretty well. Whereas Chivalrous Kingdoms, that's Bretonia. So I'd be very curious to see how these numbers are going to change now that Old World is out, and to see what armies people are going to play over there, and then say, well, I want to do something like that here for regiments or for Age of Fantasy. But I'm betting these numbers are going to change a little bit. All right, war fleets. Oops, sorry. Which Warfleet factions? I think this is a little premature because they just released the new edition where they expanded from 6 fleets to, almost 20. And I find it interesting down here, the greatest is none of the above. So I would, if I were OPR, I would be a little puzzled here. I'm like, we just gave you quadruple the options and you're still finding something else. So if any of you checked this box, please tell me, what do you mean by other? You don't play any of these. Is it a combination? Is it a homebrew? Are you taking one of these and just kind of putting your own name on it? Are you using the Patreon calculator and literally building your own fleet? What is other? So let me know. This one down here, I find interesting. They want to push the lore forward. They want to world build a little more. And the one people want to see the most, by a pretty clear indicator, is the Saurian Star Host. The rest, pretty even. Everybody seems to want to see the whole thing move forward, and slightly more than half want to see the Star Host first, because that's a very unique army. You don't have Lizardmen in 40K, but you have them in one-page rules. And if we come on down here, very similar. Where do you want to see the lore move forward for fantasy? We've got Saurians just eking out a victory over the vampires, followed by the Ratmen, followed by the Duchies of Vinci. And right here, folks, this is why I think Tixal looks the way that it does. They took the #1 faction that everyone was interested in, and then they took one of their own creations and said, let's put them together. People want this one. It's one of our own. It's a chance to revamp the models, introduce new stuff, and that's where we get Secrets of Tixal. So I'm excited at this, that One Page Rules is asking the community and the customers, they're like, okay, what are you looking for? And then they're going based on that. That's good for business. That's good for the players. That's just good all around. And again, I'll be very curious in 6 months to see how all of these questions have changed. The stats have changed. What new questions are they asking? All right, folks, so there it is. I managed to keep it under 20 minutes, so this should be enough at least to get you to work or to finish that first model you started. I'll see you on the next one. In the meantime, remember, keep your dice on the table, and it may not be perfect, but it's good enough.